is an estate agent and she also manages properties in Sallins, County Kildare. Sharon, you've been working in the estate agency sector for a number of years. What have been the major changes that you've witnessed within your sector since you started out?
Well, John, I set foot in the property market in 1998, and that was in Brighton in the UK. Brighton was extremely fast-paced and they had high-end properties. It was a great learning experience, and that's where I done all my training. After a number of years, then I came back to Ireland. I worked in, in an estate agents, and then in 2004, I decided to go self-employed. And that was, I suppose, that was my first step into working for myself. But since then, to date, there has been huge changes in the property sector. For instance, in 2004, we seen the introduction, I should say, of the RTB, the Residential Tenancies Board. That was set up to regulate, I suppose, the private rented sector. So that was a big, I suppose, step forward for the rented sector. Then in 2006, we seen BERs being brought into law, and they were for the energy performance of buildings, basically. So any house that's been rented or sold needs a BER certificate, unless, of course, it's exempt. Then the big one for us as estate agents and property service users would be the Property Service Regulatory Authority. They were set up in 2012, and they were set up as a statutory body with responsibility for licensing and regulating agents such as myself. And the whole idea of that was to put confidence into the sector and to give a lot more consumer protection, basically. With the RTB, I suppose the changes, especially, there was a lot of changes in law during COVID. But I suppose from December 16 to September 2020, across the country, they brought in rent pressure zones, which would not allow landlords to increase rent if you fell under those zones, and to increase it dramatically for tenants. So they're the major changes, John.
Yes, yeah. Now, my experience of estate agents is that if you want to sell a house or you want to rent out a house, you would go to your local estate agent of choice, and you would make an appointment to see them. They would call around to your property. They would put a value on your house, or say your house is worth X thousands of euros per month for rent.
Yeah.
Now, of course, COVID came along in 2020 and it's disrupted the whole sector. And people could no longer call to your house. Everything was done via digital media, I presume. So what are the major changes that you've seen in your business as a result of the COVID pandemic?
I suppose just going back to the regulator as well, there is a register there that people can get an idea. It's not it won't tell you, say, a 3-bed semi is worth X, in an estate, because they could be 20,000 saying the difference, but one may have an attic conversion, or it may have be better, more modern property, or exactly. So, but it does give people a good guide in a transparent way as what they're generally going for an area. So sorry, just wanted to touch on that. COVID, I suppose, fast-tracked us all into the digital world in estate agency. But I think we've adapted well. It did during COVID. Obviously, there was less face-to-face interaction with our with our clients and customers. But we had to rely more on the technology side of things for virtual viewings. A lot of estate agents started using bidding tools online, digital signing tools for documents. Now that was, so there was a lot of, I suppose, more digital technology used. We obviously had to, because of COVID and the pandemic, we had to do a greater emphasis on cleaning and sanitation and be quite strict about that for safety reasons. As well as that, then we had to, I suppose, adapt to the trends, because with COVID, especially the first few lockdowns, people wanted an office space. They wanted an outdoor space. They realized that they wanted, certain, if they were trading up or trading down, certain items, in their next property. So there was a big shift there. And then as well as that, there was people that were living in urban areas. They wanted to go rural, because obviously they could work from home anywhere in the world virtually, So they were the major, especially the technology side for us, which was good.
Yeah. And of course, for an estate agent, you have to implement and think very quickly on your feet in the face of a pandemic, to get all this software installed in your office. For example, you're talking there about getting forms signed digitally. That's something that doesn't happen overnight. You have to get the software, get used to using it yourself, and then get your clients on board to use it. So it just doesn't happen quite overnight. And of course, with the pandemic, you just mentioned there a second ago, where people wanted to sell houses in urban areas to move to more rural areas. What's happened there is, if you take West Cork as an example, you'll pay through the nose for even a 3 or 4 bedroom house in a small village in West Cork. Now, that's fine, but you go down there and you could find that you're in an area where there's no rural fiber broadband, for example. So you're relying on older digital technology. So, there's pros and cons, I suppose you could say. And I think one thing that's kind of come out of this pandemic is the need to roll out the national digital broadband strategy right throughout the whole island of Ireland, because
Absolutely, John.
You have areas like, say, Kilcock, Salins, which only went on to fibre broadband in the last couple of years, and they're really suburban areas. These clusters around, say, West Cork, like Skibbereen, Clonakilty, where they have very high broadband speeds. But in the more rural areas, it's quite slow. So that's an impediment to business development, I suppose you could say. Yeah. Have you seen any kind of unveiling or stepping back, in terms of digital technology since the pandemic's kind of eased off as such?
I suppose we don't do as many virtual tours, even though we did set up a YouTube channel at the time, because people could walk through the houses and really, people were actually bidding at the time on houses with actually physically stepping foot in them, which was a bit crazy, but it worked obviously during COVID. We probably have stepped back to that, because we are back on site now meeting people, which is great, because it's always good to meet people, John, and to have that interaction, a human kind of interaction with people. We're back out doing viewings now. So maybe step back a little bit on that, but regards digital signing and that kind of stuff, that's still going on. So a lot of it was kept, and some step back on, John, a little bit.
I know what you're saying there.
I can only speak for myself now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and you're welcome to do that. It's your own experience. I know what you're saying there. In terms of digital signing documents, you have to have ample cloud space to store all these documents on behalf of your clients, and you make sure they're not lost in transit. It's quite an intricate area, of course. I know from experience myself. You need plenty of capacity in terms of servers, cloud capacity, to make sure you have all these documents stored. And you probably need to keep those for a number of years for GDPR.
That's right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of, say, BER ratings, for example, without going too deep into it, do you find that, for example, if you take a young couple who want to buy a second-hand home, and that's more or less your market, do they prefer to have access to a house, or to look at a house that has, say, an A or a B BER rating, as opposed to C, D, E, or F, whatever the case may be? Are they more fussy about the BER rating than the older person?
It depends, John. I've come across, different parties. Some young couples would just want a new home with an A-rated, an A-rated home, and that's it. But normally, if you find a couple looking at secondhand, unless it's a very, very low, extremely low rating, it's not really an issue. I don't find. They tend to think sometimes with secondhand properties, they have bigger gardens, maybe bigger driveways. Maybe the walls are solid if they're built in the 50s or 60s, or even later, more solid houses. So there's a wide variety of people's idea of what they want to buy, John. Of
course, I remember there in the mid noughties, for example, before the bust came, credit crunch arrived. People were looking at properties because they had big back gardens. And one thing was, they might pay over the odds for the actual property as it stood, and the back garden and front garden, with a view to getting planning permission for another house in the back garden. So you'd have two properties where there was one,
Well, absolutely, and that's what you get when you're here on the ground, is that people tend to feel that some of the the secondhand properties have bigger gardens, because I suppose a lot of the newer ones tend to be a little smaller in size in general.
Yeah, of course, there was a move to, more smaller houses with smaller gardens in the mid noughties, higher density home, I suppose you could say, higher density properties. That was something that was brought in the mid noughties, and there's plenty of estates, say in Greater Dublin area, in more recent years, of course, where there's much higher density of houses in a smaller area, and some of them have minimalist or no front gardens, and then the back garden is very small, so the actual room to maneuver in terms of an extension is limited enough. If you have no front garden, you can't extend your house at the front without planning permission, of course. And then you're left with small back gardens, so you can use up a certain amount of your back garden for an extension out the back if needs be, or else you're looking at an attic conversion. I know what you're saying there. That's all changed in the last couple of years. Yeah, but do you find, for example, with BER ratings, that people are, fussy enough, I suppose you could say, in terms of what they're looking for, or is there people out there looking for a good bargain, maybe an older house that needs substantial retrofitting, for example, and they're looking to nearly gut that house from the inside, and then to completely retrofit it in terms of all the modern compliances and heating systems. Are there such cases out there?
Oh, absolutely. There's always people that'd be willing to take on a project like that. But I suppose now with the cost of everything, people are probably thinking twice about that, when it comes to materials, because they're gone through the roof at the moment. So it's not ideal. But yeah, you'll always get somebody who's willing to take on a project. I've done it myself previously. So it's not for the faint-hearted. That's all I'd say. So, there'll always be people willing to do that, John. Yeah.
I know what you're saying there, that you have to move into a house, then you have to get planning permission, you have to get drawings from an architect. Then, of course, you have the whole disruption to your life, because you might have to move out that house temporarily for the builders to do the work they need to do, because you might be looking at taking the roof off the house, a full rewiring of the house, underfloor heating, all that good stuff. So it can be very disruptive on a family. You're looking at moving out of the house maybe for 3 months, 6 months. You see it on Room to Improve on RTE every couple of months.
Programs, yeah.
Dermot Bannon, his program, where it can just impact a family big time. And, we've seen here recently with the inflation in building materials that what was costed at maybe 100,000 is becoming 150,000 very quickly. And people are having to look to get funds from other sources than bank loans. They might be having to borrow money from family members or relatives to complete retrofitting of their house. Yeah, it's all pressure.
Absolutely.
What have you seen in terms of say, rental properties? I know, for example, that there's a great shortage of rental properties. Are you seeing pressure coming on from want-to-be tenants to, find that house for them on their behalf?
I feel extremely sorry for tenants out there at the minute. They have a hard, especially if they have families. I mean, a lot of landlords exited the private rental market over the last number of years due to the legislation. A lot of them, well, that's what they've implied to me. Only the ones that I'm aware of, were the majority. So you have, an influx of tenants being made homeless through no fault of their own. And there's just not the supply there for them. So something definitely needs to be done about that side of it. I know they're, at the end of the day, it's a crisis point, John, to be honest with you. And we see it daily here, and when you do put up a property, you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails from people. So your inbox is just jammed, and it's an impossibility to answer every one of those tenants, but they all deserve an answer. But unfortunately, it's just not possible. So I suppose from an estate agent's point of view, it's a lot more of a workload trying to go through emails and trying to answer people, but it's a crisis point. It's extremely bad at the moment,
Yeah.
So that needs to be addressed, I suppose, by government more so.
Yeah. Just taking it from an emotional perspective, Sharon, you might have let's say, take 10 tenants who are looking for a property, and
Yeah.
you believe in your own heart that these people are deserving of,
Yeah.
a property, and you're doing your very best to
Mm.
facilitate these people. How
Mm.
do you feel emotionally when you've got to say, I've no property available at the moment for you? How does that impact you as a person dealing with your clients?
Like, I have to be honest, you have to put your professional hat on, and you have to take the instructions of the landlord. I mean, there could be, you could have 30 people out viewing one, say, on an evening or whatever. Now that's just, I'm just using that figure. Obviously it's a lot more. But the landlord there's only one property, so he can only go with one person. So I have the job most of the time to go back and give the bad news to the others, and they're equally as good as each other, the tenants,
Yeah, of
majority of the time.
course.
And to be honest with you, John, it's just, you just have to be professional about it. You have to do your job at the end of the day, but it
Yeah,
is getting harder, out there for agents, I feel,
yeah.
you know.
What you're saying there effectively is you have to keep your emotions within yourself and not to show uh, favoritism for one potential
Oh
tenant over
God, no.
another tenant. You have to,
Absolutely. You have to be professional at all times, John.
yeah, this.
And you absolutely empathize with people, because I just don't. I think it's disgraceful, the type of rents that are being charged out there, and that's my personal, opinion. Obviously the market is the market, but I just feel, you do actually, it pulls at you, and when you see people with families, and then they're looking at properties that are probably a lot more expensive than the property they've just left, and you worry, how are they going to survive? Because I know, John, like even myself, if I was to go out there tomorrow to do that, it'd be a challenge,
Yeah,
and I suppose it's I feel for them as well when they tell me that they don't get a response from a lot of agents. But I can understand from the agent's point of view why they're not, because it's an impossibility.
yeah.
So, and then a lot of them don't even get to do the viewings, and they're so thankful. And but you just have to just be professional, John. That's it.
Of course. Another kind of recent situation is, of course, we have seen the ECB putting up interest rates.
Mm.
People rush at the early stages to fix their mortgage. Now, you might get a fixed rate mortgage for 2, 3, 4 years, but now, the banks are actually starting to increase the interest rates on fixed rate mortgages also. So I think we're seeing pressure coming on people to pay their mortgage. The interest rates are going up.
Mm.
Therefore, people's mortgage payments are going up each month for the last number of months. Do you see a situation where there might be a slight correction in house prices?
Well, I feel that it has leveled out, from what I've seen, somewhat. It's still good sales, but it's certainly not the way it was after our first lockdown, when it went crazy. And I suppose back then, from 2020 to mid 22, it kind of went a bit crazy. There was a lack of supply, John. And the interest rates were low. So, obviously the market was strong. But now, like you said, like basically, with the central bank introduction of the new mortgage measures for first-time buyers, say they were able to borrow 4 times their gross income since January. And then with the interest rates rising, it'll be interesting to see how things pan out for the rest of the year. But at the moment, it's pretty level at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see by the end of the year, John. We'll just have to wait and see how the market performs.
True. I know what you're saying there, that people are now able to borrow more, which is going to give them more of a mortgage. It gives them more leeway in looking for a house.
Yeah.
But the more people who are looking for houses, is going to drive up the price of properties, because the supply is not there to meet the demand effectively. That's what's happening. And that, but at the same time, if redundancies take effect in, say, the technology sector, and we've seen it with, say, Google announcing redundancies there recently. You had Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, and many more. So there are, say, in the technology sector particularly, redundancies taking effect. That might have a dampening effect on prices of houses, say, in Greater Dublin. These people generally live and work from, or again in big cities like London, where there's many thousands of people working in the technology sector and financial sector. So, yeah, there could be a doubling of house prices eventually. So it's all to play for. Yeah. Where do you see the future of estate agents such as yourself, where you're selling predominantly second-hand houses or you're managing properties on behalf of this, a landlord who has one or two houses to rent out? What do you see as the future for your business?
Well, hopefully, I'll be in the industry hopefully for another few years to come, John. But who knows? But I suppose the rental sector is a bit, I suppose, we'll have to keep our eye on that. It's hard to know what I know they're discussing at the minute about extending the termination ban or eviction ban. So we'll have to just keep our fingers on the pulse with that. That will just mean, I suppose, for estate agents, there won't be as many people moving around. Tenants will tend to obviously stay put, and for a number of reasons. One, because of the legislation, if it's brought in, and number two, because obviously maybe where they are, if they were to move, the prices would be a lot more expensive. Sales, I suppose, like I said, John, we'll just have to wait and see with regards to the interest rates, and like you've just said, or we've discussed, I should say, with the central bank and all that. It will encourage people maybe that they can access more funds. So, yeah, hopefully, John, hopefully there'll be more, I suppose, social housing brought into the market as well. And I know that there's a lot of building going on still, so there'll be a lot more supply for people as well. But definitely the rental sector needs to be looked at seriously.
Yeah, I know, for example, there's a new estate being built in Kilcock, and they're using this new type of construction methodology called insulated concrete formwork. So they're building the houses quicker. These are very, airtight houses. I think they're an A2 BER rating. So that's very, very good. Yeah. But apparently those type of houses, they're great, they're quick to build. But if you want to extend those houses eventually, it's hard to do because you're breaking through solid concrete effectively. So there's pros and cons. There's a need to build houses and build them now, but people want to extend those houses eventually because they have a bigger family or they need more space. There are pros and cons. So whereas say with the wooden frame houses, of which it's a lot in Ireland in recent years, they tend to heat up quickly, but they lose their heat more quickly, if you know what I mean. But they're easier to extend also, of course. There's all these pros and cons. This has been a fascinating conversation today, Sharon. So I'd like to thank you for your time to come on the show today. So the takeaways I have from today's conversation with Sharon are, firstly, in terms of regulation, there's been a step up over the last, say, number of years, the last 20 years, in terms of regulation within the rental sector houses. You have the RTB. Also, for all houses across the board that go on the market, either as a rental house or for sale, you have the BER rating, which is impacting older properties that might need substantial money spent on them to get them up to a reasonable standard. Within the estate agency sector, you have the statutory body that's in place the last number of years, where people like estate agents get a license from that statutory body rather than going to the courts, as was the practice many years ago.
Exactly, John.
In addition to that, we've had the whole area of the COVID pandemic and how that changed the whole area for estate agents in terms of their dealing with clients and customers. And they had to move from in-person meetings to digital showings of houses. But you've also had the rollout of digital consigning technology, for example, to where customers sign
electronically sign.
As against signing on paper. So you're handling less paper between clients and estate agents. That's an improvement, I suppose, in one sense. But there are other market dynamics in place. And we talked about the fact that mortgage interest rates are going up. First-time buyers can borrow up to 4 times their mortgage now since January. That gives the first-time buyer more leverage in a difficult enough market where prices are high. But we're also seeing the fact that there is redundancies in the technology sector that could impact the wider economy eventually. We don't know. It's all to play for yet. But we might see a levelling out or a slight decrease in house prices. That'll ease the pressure on the first-time buyer. But at the same time, there is a shortage of houses coming on the market, of new builds. And that's reflecting in the fact that there's a huge demand out there for rental properties, but the demand for the properties far outweighs the supply. So, on that note, I'd like to thank you for your time today, Sharon. It's been great
You're
having you
welcome.
on. And is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience before I let you go?
No, thanks for having me, John. And I hope you enjoyed the chat. And thanks again. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're most welcome. And on that note, I'll bring today's show to an end. Thank you.